Are you a small business owner struggling to nail down your brand voice? Have you hired copywriters only to discover they couldn't capture your messaging? If that sounds like you, then you need to download my free resource, Discover Your Brand Voice in 3 Easy Steps. Once you complete these simple prompts, you will have a solid foundation for producing your business copy, whether you decide to write your own content or outsource it to a professional, like, say, me. As an added bonus, you'll be automatically subscribed to my email list, where you can learn more about my writing services, hear my thoughts on improving ineffective communication, and receive weekly updates about my podcast, Emotional Abuse is Real. Head over to the link in the show notes to grab Discover Your Brand Voice in 3 Easy Steps today. Trigger warning, this podcast episode features discussions of gambling addiction, physical, emotional, and narcissistic abuse, and abortion. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Emotional Abuse is Real. I'm your host, Serene Leeds. I'm a professional writer and storyteller, and I'm so glad you're here. Today's episode kicks off a 4-part series featuring a single guest, an emotional and narcissistic abuse survivor I'm going to call Josephine for the sake of her privacy. Over the summer, Josephine and I recorded a marathon 2-hour interview where she shared about the multiple abusers she's encountered throughout her life. For part 1 of my discussion with Josephine, we're going to talk about her childhood experiences with emotional abuse within her family, which regrettably led to a pattern of unhealthy relationships. As a young adult, Josephine began dating a controlling partner, and she soon found herself facing an unplanned pregnancy. But as always, before we get into the episode, I have a few quick announcements. Please make sure you're following me on Instagram at Serene Leeds Writes. That's SareneleedsWrites, and that you're subscribed to this podcast on either Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Also, don't forget to support Emotional Abuse is Real by leaving a 5-star rating and by writing a review over on Apple Podcasts. I'd also like to remind you that Emotional Abuse is Real still has a Buy Me a Coffee page, and donations are always welcome. That's because this podcast is a one-woman operation, and your donations help support the podcast's production costs. If you're interested in sharing your emotional abuse experience on this podcast, please either DM me on Instagram, email me at hello@sereneleedswrites.com, or fill out my quick and simple application form. I've left links to my Instagram, email, the show's application form, the Buy Me a Coffee page, and my free download, Discover Your Brand Voice in 3 Easy Steps, in the show notes. As with many episodes on this podcast, I must warn you that Josephine's story is not an easy listen. At the same time, I do believe that the more we share these kinds of survivor stories, the more people will feel empowered to stop emotional abuse in its tracks. Anyway, without further ado, here's part 1 of my conversation with Josephine. Welcome to the podcast, Josephine. Thank you so much for being here. I would love to turn the microphone over to you so you can share your emotional abuse story with our listeners.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate you allowing me to be a guest and share my story.
Of course. My pleasure.
So I believe that the abuse for me started early on in childhood. I grew up in, I think the outside world would have seen my childhood as pretty standard.
Mm-hmm.
We were middle class. We lived in a decent neighborhood. My parents were married. They're actually still married after over 50 years. but there was a lot going on under the surface that people didn't know about. My father was a compulsive gambler
Mm.
for many years. And it really took a toll on the family. And I'm the youngest of four.
Mhm.
And so I actually dealt with it the least because he probably stopped gambling around the time I was maybe 8 or 9 years old and started to seek help for it. So I am grateful for that he
Yeah.
did eventually start attending meetings and, he stopped gambling since then and has never returned to it. So I do give him credit for that.
That is incredible. Yeah.
But my father was a very emotionally stunted person.
Hmm.
Um, and I think, a lot of that might tie into that sort of, cultural background that we came from. It was very Italian American.
Hmm.
My parents were born in the 40s. It was
Hmm.
very different. They sort of fit into that typical stereotype where my father went to work and my mother stayed home with us.
Sure.
And I think my father always had that sort of compulsive personality, that addictive personality, where even after he stopped gambling, he would just sort of obsess about other things.
Hmm.
So he was
Hmm.
always very tense and full of anxiety and short tempered.
Hmm.
And so there were times when I was really young where he was still gambling, where he did absolutely horrific things to my mother that were so insidious. They weren't like, your typical idea of physical abuse, but he was so emotionally and psychologically abusive to her.
Yeah.
And then there was also this extreme financial stress going on in the
Yeah.
family
Sure.
because, every time he was doing, I would say, well in his gambling and was winning a
Yeah.
whole lot,
Yeah.
he would shower us with gifts and would shower my mother with gifts, and they were
Hmm.
going away on expensive vacations. And then all of a sudden he would, have a bad run and we wouldn't have any money for groceries.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to explain that to your friends. Um, or it's something that you really don't want your friends to find out about at all at that young age. It's
Hmm.
very humiliating.
Sure.
Um, and so I felt like there was this idea early on of keeping secrets and that, we don't talk about our family issues
Yeah.
to the outside world. We
Yeah.
present this unified, look that we are together and that we have it all together, and we don't let the outside world know that we are toxic.
So common with older generations. It's incredible. It really is. Yeah.
And so my I do remember, one of my earliest memories of something emotionally abusive that my father did towards
Mhm.
me was, I think I was around 6 or 7 years old. And my father was, I think people get this idea in their heads of what compulsive gamblers are like.
Mm.
And I think it's this idea of like this guy that's gone all the time, out at bars and maybe like cheating on his wife and doing drugs, and drinking too much. And it's strange. My father was an oddly responsible type.
Yeah.
He always went to work every single day
Hmm.
because he knew that that's how we got our income.
Yeah.
And if there was no money coming in, there wasn't going to be any money to gamble with. So he was, always at his 9 to 5. But as time went
Practical. A
on,
practical man.
right, it was
Yeah.
odd.
Yeah.
But as time went on, he was spending more and more nights away from the house. And I remember at one point he was gone so much, I didn't really understand why at such a young age. I thought that he and my mom were going to split up, and I thought that
Yeah.
he was leaving the family.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I was in my bedroom on the second floor, and I started pulling out pieces of paper and writing notes to my father while he wasn't home yet, that basically said things like, "Daddy, please don't leave us."
Mm,
And
yeah.
then I folded them up into airplanes,
Yeah.
and I sailed them out of my bedroom window
So
into the
cute.
garden below.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's funny, at that age, I didn't think that he would ever find those letters.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know
Mm-hmm.
where I thought that I was sending them, but
Yeah.
he came home.
Yeah.
He found them all in the garden.
Wow.
And instead of his response being, "I'm so sorry that I haven't been spending enough time with you," or
Yeah.
that I made you feel unloved or ignored, he was completely angry. He was furious with me. And he
Yeah.
called up to me and he made me march down the stairs.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically like demoralized me in front of my mother and was like, "Who said I was leaving?" And I said,
Yeah.
"Well, no one, but I don't know where you are half the time." And he
Mm-hmm.
said, "Well, if I didn't say that I'm leaving, then I'm not leaving. And go back to bed." It
Yeah.
was very curt and hurtful and
So
yeah.
sorry. I just knew how you were. And just with my own experience with older generations, I was like, he's going to be angry at you.
Hmm.
I just knew it. I knew it. Yeah.
And to this day, my father sort of has like the emotional bandwidth of like a bug. I mean, he
Yeah.
just
Yeah. Yeah.
doesn't,
Yeah.
and it's interesting that it took me all of these years and all of this time in therapy and reading and researching and
Yeah.
working on myself to kind of connect the dots that a lot of this goes back to my childhood.
Sure. Sure.
Um, but
Yeah.
something interesting that happened a few years later is that once I started to reach, I'd say like close to puberty age, although I was a late bloomer. When I
Mm-hmm.
was around 12,
Mm.
um, I was walking to cross country running practice,
Mm-hmm.
and I had to walk kind of across from the high school in my town over to a
Mm-hmm.
park.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was walking into the park, there were a bunch of slightly older football players coming down the hill towards me. They were concluding practice.
Mm-hmm.
And they were probably around 14 or 15. And one of the football players screamed out at me, "Hey, how old are you?" And I said, 12.
Yeah.
And I was definitely not an old looking 12. I was, skinny, underdeveloped, gawky looking. And he said to me, "Do you put out?"
Oh no. Yeah.
And at first, I didn't even understand
Right.
fully what he meant. Like, it
Yeah.
really took me a second to register because I had done nothing with boys at that age. I hadn't even
Sure.
kissed a boy.
Sure.
And it was all so shocking. And
Yeah.
then all of his friends laughed and he laughed. And then they sort of wandered past me. And I kind of
Mm.
just stood there for a moment.
Yeah.
And then a couple moments later, I noticed that my brother, my older brother,
Yeah.
is coming down the hill dressed in the same uniform. So now I put together that this is my brother's football team,
Right.
and that boy that said that to me was a teammate of my
Right.
brother's. And
Right.
so my brother comes down and he's angry. And
Yeah.
he immediately goes into protective mode. And he
Yeah.
said, "What did that person say to you?" And I told him, and he was really angry.
Yeah.
And then he kind of marched off to the locker room. And I
Uh-huh.
thought, oh, this is really good. Like, I have a protective older brother.
Right.
He's going to look out for me. Um, and so later that night at dinner, my parents were sort of in the kitchen. My brother and I were in the next room in the dining room, like setting the table. And I said to my brother, "Hey, did you ever figure out who that guy was?"
Yeah.
And he shot me like this look of death.
Uh-uh.
Like, "Why are you bringing it up? Don't talk about it. Keep your mouth shut."
Right.
And so, I always got that idea in my head that it's not okay for me to inquire about things, express my feelings,
Yeah.
or bring things up that go to school. It was apparently like there was like a secret world
Yeah.
where, it was like we keep the family problems locked inside the house and we
Yeah.
keep the friend problems locked inside the school, and you can't
Hmm.
talk about anything that's going on. And
Yeah.
what it taught me was that as things went on and I got older and I got into these problems with, boys and men, that I couldn't open up my mouth and talk about it because either I wouldn't be believed or I would be dismissed or
Yeah.
I would be told to keep quiet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a terrible thing to learn that at such an early age before you've even started dating.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
And what I realized many years later is that my older brother turned out a lot like my father.
Mm.
As
Yeah.
I started to develop more and I got into maybe 13 or 14 years old and I started to get a little bit more attention from boys,
Yeah.
my brother went from, I'd say, being protective to being downright controlling. It was, he didn't want me wearing certain outfits out of the
Mm-hmm.
house.
Mm-hmm.
And it was almost like he took on this fatherly role.
Yeah.
And when I would go out and I would be hanging out, having fun with friends, and I would come home, he would immediately start launching insults at me, and he would try to portray it in is, I'm as he's being protective, but
I'm looking
really,
out for you. Yeah.
right. And
But it was,
he's
but it was, it was an undercurrent of shame. Yeah.
exactly. It was making it
Yeah.
all my fault. Well,
Of
you're getting all these
course.
attention, from boys because you're dressed like this. You're dressed
Right.
inappropriately.
Ugh.
Your skirt is too short. You're this and that. You shouldn't be out hanging out with boys at all.
Yeah.
It was just so controlling.
Mm-hmm.
And it is absolutely of no surprise to me at all that I ended up in these controlling, abusive relationships
Yeah.
beginning
Yeah.
in my, I'd say, late teens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because it was all
And
you
so,
knew. You thought that was that it was normal.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think, even, I mentioned before there was a cultural aspect of it, but I
Sure.
think that really played into it as well, because um the men that I grew up around were very misogynistic. And this doesn't even, I don't even mean within my own family, although there was that as well. I
Yeah.
mean, boys that I was going to high school with,
Yeah.
treated women, with a lot of disrespect.
Yeah.
There were older men in the town, teachers, and, friends of my father who looked at me inappropriately, and I
Mm-hmm.
never
Mm-hmm.
really knew what to do with it.
Yeah. Because
Um,
I'm assuming you had no one to turn to about something like that. Yeah.
No, and if I did dare even hint at it, the blame would come 100% in my direction.
Right. Right.
Oh, you're clearly
Exactly.
misconstruing it, or,
Yep.
maybe you shouldn't be dressed like that, or maybe you shouldn't
Uh-huh.
be smiling at someone, or it was so ridiculous.
Oh yeah. That
Um,
sounds so familiar. Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
just, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I went to high school in the early to mid 90s, and I never felt that anyone was looking out for the women. Absolutely not.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I think we're probably around the same age, because
Yeah.
I started high school in 95, and
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
graduated in 99.
Yeah.
And
You're
yeah, I
actually,
don't
yeah, you're younger than me, actually.
and I don't ever remember getting that feeling that, even if a teacher at my high school had done something inappropriate, that I had anyone safe to go to.
Hmm. Yeah.
I feel like it would have
Yeah.
been swept under the carpet to protect them.
Hmm.
And the town that I grew up in, was so small that, everybody was interconnected in some way. It was like, you might have a friend in high school whose dad was also a teacher,
Yeah.
whose mom was also on the board of education, who was friends with the mayor, it was very tightly knit.
Oh, yeah.
And so, it's, I had one pretty good relationship in high school, which was my first serious relationship.
Hmm.
And although he was a couple years older than I was, he was very respectful. He
Hmm.
never pushed me into doing anything. Um, you know, and but the relationship that I had where I first started to experience abuse, I entered into it when I was 18 and he
Yeah.
was also 18.
Okay.
And we got together the summer right after high school graduation.
Hmm.
And it was a very fast moving, tumultuous, like what I would describe at the time passionate, but really it was quite immature. It was a very young love.
Yeah.
And I think he had a lot of emotional problems.
Hmm. Hmm.
I know that there were things going on in his family. I think he had gotten into some trouble, maybe was, getting into the wrong crowd. And I
Yeah.
think that his parents thought that the only way for him to get away from that was to put him into the military.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
so they had signed him up to go off to the military before he was even 18.
Wow.
But it was this decision of like, this is what you are doing after high school, because once you graduate, you are going somewhere where you will learn rules and respect,
Yeah.
and hopefully it will calm you down a little bit.
Yeah.
But in a way, I really wish that they would have handled it differently, because I think there was some serious emotional stuff going on with him. And I think
Hmm.
sending him from a house with a controlling mother and a controlling older sister, and then dumping him right into the
Oh
military,
my God, no.
where someone is screaming in his face,
Right.
telling him more orders,
Right.
is not going to really teach him anything.
No. No. No.
But in no way is that to excuse what he did to me. But I always find it
Of
interesting
course.
to kind of delve a little bit deep into into the people that I've had these relationships with,
Absolutely.
because I know that there are these underlying causes.
Yeah.
In the end, it is their decision 100% to abuse,
Yes.
but their history really does play a big part into it.
Oh, absolutely. I think all of us who have been through therapy, I think we all do that.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, he and I, like I said, we had this very like fast moving relationship. There were a lot of I love yous probably said far too soon. And we
Hmm.
thought that we
Sure.
had limited time because we only had the summer together
Right.
before he was going to go off to boot camp and I was going to go
Right.
off to college. And we didn't know if
Right.
things were going to, you know, um, keep going. And so I remember we were able to kind of keep things going after he went off to boot camp. We really didn't get to speak that much, but we were writing a lot of letters back and
Hmm.
forth.
Hmm.
And one time when he came to visit me for a weekend, um, he was in front of my family at dinner and he was cursing a lot, like using a lot
Mm.
of curse words. And there's just
Mm.
something that you don't do in front of my family.
Yeah.
And so I pulled him aside and we were in the basement of my house in my bedroom. And I said, I know that there's a lot of cursing in the military. I know that it's, heavily male at that point.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
know that the speaking is very free. I was like, but when you're here with my family, I just really need you to curb that a little bit because
Hmm.
I can see that it's making them all uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it makes you sound stupid, but I know that you're not stupid
Hmm.
because I've read all these amazing letters that you've sent to me and I know that you have the vocabulary,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I think you're just getting nervous.
Yeah.
But I think me saying the word stupid set him off,
Yeah.
and he put one hand around my throat
Oh no.
and
Yeah.
put the other hand underneath my armpit and picked me up by my
Oof.
throat
Oh,
and threw
no.
me across the
Oh,
room.
I'm so sorry. Yeah.
And I landed on the bed.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember just being so much in shock
Yeah.
that I didn't even know how to react. I was definitely angry and
Hmm.
hurt. And
Hmm.
so for a while, I just couldn't speak. But it was almost like the minute he had realized what had done, he was already apologizing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he was already, like, the minute I hit the bed, it was almost like he was already there next to me, apologizing. And it was such a weird, it was such a weird feeling. It was almost
Yeah.
like, I don't know what to do with this because I really love this person.
Right.
And they've definitely had emotional outbursts before, but it's never been violent like this. And then it was almost like we just never talked about it again.
Yeah.
And it was very strange.
Sure.
But I think, all the times that he sort of lashed out at me verbally and, mocked me or made me, or his family made me feel like I wasn't good enough. And then that, I think I really started to get into this mindset where I was almost like a prime candidate for abuse. And so he and I, tried to stay together as much as we could after that. I want to say we were together for maybe a total of 2 years, but it was really, really difficult with me at school and him in the military. And eventually we broke up.
Yeah.
And the next man that I dated, I was 20 and he was 27. And so in my mind, I thought, well, this is going to be completely different because this is not dating a boy.
Yeah.
This is dating a man, an older man who is established in a career and is mature and has been in serious relationships before. And he's going to know how to respect me and treat me well.
Yeah.
And I couldn't have been more wrong.
Yeah.
He was an absolute monster of a human being. The relationship started out okay. There was, I think, a little bit of sort of the love bombing going on of, you kind of have that fairy tale beginning where, you feel so important to the other person and they want to introduce you to everyone. Their family, their friends, they want to spend a whole lot of time with you. But it very quickly started to feel like I didn't matter at all to him. It was almost like there was a switch that was flipped. And it went from me being the most important thing in the world to, once he had me, me being absolutely disposable.
Yeah.
And it was such a strange feeling. And I think the thing that really changed the relationship a whole lot was that, I want to say a few months in, probably 4 months into the relationship, I was at an annual checkup with my gynecologist.
Yeah.
And she said to me, hey, how are you doing on the birth control pill? And I said, fine. It is what it is. I take it every day. And she said, we have this new thing that's out on the market right now. And it's kind of really aimed towards, busy, young ladies on the go like yourself. And it's a patch. And you put it on.
Those. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, it stays on in the shower. And you put it on and it stays on for, I don't know how long, a week, or maybe like you change it out every, something like that.
Yeah.
And it won't wash off. And then bam, that's your birth control. And you don't have to worry about taking the pill every day. And I thought, this sounds fantastic.
Right.
And so she really, pushed for it. So I said, okay, let's give it a shot. So I start by putting the first patch on.
Yeah.
And then I go off on vacation with a friend to Aruba. And I get in the water. And the patch immediately comes off.
Yeah.
And I was like, she told me this would stay on in the shower, but perhaps I should have asked about the ocean.
Yeah.
Like,
I'm sure you're not the first person or only person that's happened to. Yeah.
Right. And so, here I am on vacation. The patch has fallen off. And I was like, well, okay, when I get back, I'm going to talk to him about this. So I come back from vacation. And at this point, I drive over to his house, and
Yeah.
they're in the middle of a huge family barbecue and they're all
Uh-huh.
drinking very heavily. He's already intoxicated, but I pull
Uh,
him aside and I say, look, the patch that the doctor gave me fell off.
yeah.
So now I have no protection. We really need to be incredibly careful right now.
Yeah.
So what do we want to do? And,
Right.
what we decided was, you know, we could have been more responsible in this decision, but that we didn't need to use a condom, but that he would pull out
Mm,
and that we should be okay like that.
yeah.
Well, later that night, he is very drunk.
Yeah.
I am also intoxicated at this point because
Sure.
we've been at a barbecue
Yeah.
drinking.
Yeah.
We're alone, we're having
Yeah.
sex,
Yeah.
everything is going okay. And I keep reminding him, don't forget,
Yeah.
you have to pull out. Just don't
Right.
forget, don't forget. And he's like getting irritated because he's like, all right, I said I would. Okay.
Yeah.
And then he doesn't.
Right.
And I immediately said to him, what the hell did you just do?
Yeah.
And he said, I'm so sorry. I forgot I was drunk,
Right.
which I don't believe for a moment because I kept reminding him over and over again.
Yeah.
And so I'm freaking out. I don't
Yeah.
know what to do. At this point in time, I mean, this was over 20 years ago. I don't know if the morning after pill was readily available. It may
I
have
can't
just been
remember.
hitting
I'm
that
not
point.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, like if it was, I didn't know that it was.
Right.
So
Right.
I didn't go get the morning after pill, even if it was available.
Yeah.
I had no idea what to do. So I was just sort of waiting. And I
Mhm.
was like, okay, it was just once.
Yeah.
Surely I can't be pregnant. A couple weeks go by, I don't get my period. I take a test and I am pregnant.
Right.
And I call him up and he is away on a business trip training for a new job.
Mhm.
And so I'm going through all of this out of state, while he's out of state and I'm
Right.
alone. And I get the test and I call him up and I am just in turmoil.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I can't believe this is happening to me. I've just turned 21 years old. I am freaking out here.
Sure.
And
Sure.
his response is,
Uh-huh.
well, I'm really happy. Let's just get married. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
You realize that
No.
we can't do that. We've only been together for 4 or 5 months and I do care for you,
Yeah.
but we're not ready in any way, shape, or form to get married. I'm a kid.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm legal, but I'm a kid. I mean, I still
Yeah.
live at home with my parents. I haven't finished college yet. I don't have my own health insurance.
Right.
I was like, I haven't even started my career yet. I am in no way ready to settle down and marry you. And you don't really know me like that.
Yeah.
And I'm in no way ready to be a mother at this point.
Yeah.
And he just went into straight rage, insulting me of,
Mhm.
you know enough about me. I know enough about you. We should just get married. You're not a real woman if you don't choose to keep the baby.
Yeah.
I already know enough about you. And any other woman who has gotten pregnant who wanted a guy to just marry her would just be happy with that. And I was like, I can't believe that this is happening this way. And it was so weird because I was like, knowing what I know now, it can happen to anyone.
Yep.
Unplanned pregnancy can happen to anyone. Abuse can happen to anyone. But I always had this view of not me.
Uh-huh. Didn't we all?
Right. It's like, I was like, no, I'm that kid in school that got good grades.
Right.
I was that responsible kid that didn't mess with drugs.
Mhm.
I'm not irresponsible. There's no way that this could be happening to me.
Right.
But I had to make a decision pretty quickly. I ended up going to a Planned Parenthood.
Good.
And they gave me a second pregnancy test and they said, you are indeed pregnant.
Yeah.
And, based off your last period, we think you're about 7 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you have 2 options.
Yeah.
If you don't want to continue, we can give you the abortion pill and you can take it at home.
Mm-hmm.
They said, but it can be pretty painful and uncomfortable. And a lot of times it doesn't fully work.
Yeah.
Or we can send you to a clinic, you can have the DNC, and you can just be done with it.
Yeah.
And so I chose the second option because
Sure.
I just didn't want to be in a lot of pain at home in front of my parents
Of
and answering
course.
questions.
Of course.
So I then went to him and I told him, this is what I've chosen to do. I've made an appointment and I can't go by myself.
Yeah.
And he said, well, I'm not driving you. And then he said, and I'm not paying for it.
So I think that's as good a place as any to stop for this week. Thank you so much for listening to part 1 of my conversation with Josephine on Emotional Abuse is Real. And be sure to keep an eye out for part 2 of our chat, which will drop in 1 week's time. If you would like to be a guest on the podcast, please reach out via email at hello@sereneleadsrights.com, through Instagram @sereneleadsrights, or fill out my guest application form. Please note that this podcast should not be used as a substitute for professional mental health services. If you are a victim of emotional abuse and need help, please call or text the Suicide and Crisis Hotline at 988. Or call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. You can also text START, S-T-A-R-T, to 88788. Once again, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts. Follow me on Instagram, consider buying me a coffee, and go grab my free download, Discover Your Brand Voice in 3 Easy Steps. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.